So, you reached out and basically said, I need a really detailed explanation because I have a history exam in English. Well, I hear you loud and clear. You are in exactly the right place. Today, we are taking a mountain of complex historical data and turning it into the ultimate World War II study guide. Grab your notebooks, get comfortable, and let's master this incredible period of history together.
Here's our game plan for today. First, causes and key players. Then, the European theater, followed by the Pacific theater. After that, we'll look at resistance and science, and we'll wrap up with diplomacy and the end. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. Causes and Key Players. Understanding the Spark.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this spot, Westerplatte, near Gdansk in Poland. This was literally the spark that ignited the Second World War. On September 1st, 1939, this location was the target of the very first attack by German troops. What we're looking at is the aftermath of a fierce 7-day defense by the Polish garrison against totally overwhelming forces. But, this didn't just happen out of nowhere. Let's see how the political tensions built up to this exact moment.
Tracing these political treaties is a classic exam question, so you'll definitely want to take notes here. The war was a domino effect. In 1936, Nazi Germany and Japan signed the Anti-Comintern, or Anti-Communist Pact. Fast forward to 1938, Germany incorporates Austria in the Anschluss and takes part of Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement. Then, in a huge pivot in August 1939, Nazi Germany and the USSR signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, which secretly divided up Central Europe. And that directly paved the way for the September 1st invasion of Poland we just talked about, which finally pushed the UK and France to declare war. Now, to really understand the war, you absolutely got to know its primary architects. This side-by-side comparison is a lifesaver. On the Axis side, you've got Adolf Hitler leading Nazi Germany, Benito Mussolini leading Italy, and Emperor Hirohito of Japan. On the flip side, forming the Allied coalition, we have Winston Churchill of the UK, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the USA, Joseph Stalin of the USSR, and Chiang Kai-shek of China. Memorize these alignments, guys. They completely dictated the geopolitical strategy of the entire war.
Section 2. The European Theater. Conflict across Europe.
Take a look at the sheer scale of this. By 1942, the Axis powers had achieved a massive spread of territorial control. They dominated Central and Western Europe and were pushing deep into Soviet territory. Following the fall of France in 1940 and the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the Allies were looking at a completely daunting geographic challenge just to reclaim this vast landmass.
So, the crucial point is knowing where the momentum actually shifted. You need to have these 3 defining military turning points locked in your brain. First up, the Battle of Stalingrad from 1942 to 43. This was a massive Soviet victory over Germany and literally the ultimate turning point on the Eastern Front. Second, the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, a major Allied victory in North Africa. And finally, Operation Overlord, which you probably know as the Normandy landings, in June 1944. This successfully opened up the massive Allied offensive in Western Europe.
Section 3. The Pacific Theater. War across the ocean.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, December 7th, 1941 happened. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, dramatically forced the USA into the war. And as you can see perfectly on this map, the theater of war expanded drastically. Because of the vast distances of the Pacific Ocean, this part of the conflict was all about massive naval engagements, island-hopping campaigns, and logistical challenges that were just completely unlike anything happening over in Europe.
Here's a pro tip to help you ace your test. Use a mnemonic rule of 3 to memorize these specific turning points that finally pushed back Japanese expansion. Ready? June 1942, the Battle of Midway, a decisive American naval and air victory. Just 2 months later, August 1942, the Guadalcanal campaign kicks off, marking a major Allied victory in a series of really grueling land battles. And then by October 1944, the Battle of Leyte becomes the critical first step in freeing the Philippines from Japanese occupation.
Section 4. Resistance and Science. Beyond the front lines.
We have to look beyond just the official armies because the sheer human scale of the underground movements was staggering. By 1944, the Free France forces had 300,000 soldiers. The Yugoslav National Liberation Army, led by Joseph Broz Tito, grew to a massive 800,000 soldiers, and the Polish Home Army operated with 400,000. Now, these resistance groups faced brutal retaliation. The tragic Warsaw Uprising of 1944 alone resulted in 150,000 to 180,000 insurgent and civilian casualties. The bravery here was just immense.
But alongside that physical resistance was an invisible war. a war of mathematics. Have you ever heard of the Enigma machine? It was this incredibly complex German cipher tool. Crucially, the code was actually first broken by Polish mathematicians like Marian Rejewski back in 1932. Later on, when they fled to the UK, they teamed up with British scientists, including Alan Turing, at Bletchley Park. This whole code-breaking operation gave the Allies a vital strategic advantage, letting them literally anticipate Axis movements before they happened.
And we can't forget radar, which stands for radio detection and ranging. It was actually invented before the war, but it was rapidly developed and deployed when things kicked off. During the intense aerial bombardments of the Battle of Britain in 1940, radar was essentially an invisible shield. It allowed the UK to detect incoming German aircraft way in advance, which drastically improved their defenses and absolutely helped fend off those attacks.
Of course, science also yielded some truly devastating offensive advancements. You have the American Manhattan Project, led by General Leslie Groves and physicist Robert Oppenheimer, which developed the very first atomic bombs. Over in Germany, they developed the V-2 missile. This was a long-range guided ballistic missile launched against France and Great Britain. It was a terrifying weapon of vengeance that caused a lot of destruction. But ironically, that exact V-2 rocket technology set the foundational stage for post-war space exploration.
Section 5. Diplomacy and the End. The Post-War World.
Let's just pause for a second. We've gone through a ton of military facts, but how did the Allies actually coordinate a global war? And more importantly, how did leaders with totally different political ideologies sit down and decide what the world would look like once the shooting finally stopped?
The answer lies in these 4 major summits. Honestly, this is probably the most high-yield study tool in this whole explainer, so make sure you've got this down. In 1943, Casablanca established the goal of unconditional surrender. Later that year, Tehran is where they decided to open a new front in France. By early 1945, the Yalta Conference divided Germany into occupation zones and allowed Soviet influence in Central Europe. And finally, the Potsdam Conference. This one established the rules for governing Germany, shifted borders, and formally called on Japan to surrender. Guys, you absolutely must know the difference between Yalta and Potsdam for your exam.
All right, bringing it all to a close with the final timeline of 1945. On May 8th, Germany signed an unconditional surrender which ended the war in Europe. But over in the Pacific, the fighting continued until the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9. Shortly after that, on September 2nd, 1945, Japan formally signed an unconditional surrender, finally bringing the Pacific Theater and the entirety of the Second World War to a close.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Consider how the diplomatic borders drawn at Yalta and Potsdam, combined with the dawn of the nuclear age we just saw in the Pacific, immediately set the stage for the Cold War and the modern geopolitical world we live in right now. Keep that overarching theme in mind. It is absolute gold for an extra credit exam essay response. I really hope this highly structured breakdown helps you feel totally empowered and ready to crush that history test. Thanks for learning with me, and good luck.